Josie? Good afternoon. I know we all love our state, and that's why it is so painful today, this July day, to recognize that our state is under attack. Every part of our state is under attack. Every person in some way is under attack from the combined effects of climate change that is tonight and today ravaging our state. We have to recognize this. This wave of climate change is breaking across our state from east to west, north to south, in every particular climate that we have. And we have to recognize this in some sense. This is the summer of climate change. And we are hopeful is the summer when we rally as a united state against this horrendous threat that is threatening our people. 7.5 million people today are threatened by the forces of climate change that are hitting our state in every way imaginable. When you smell smoke this summer, it's climate change. When you see our highways buckling because the road simply expands and buckles because of heat, it's climate change. When there's not enough berries because of reduction in production of quantity, it's climate change. When fish and shellfish can't be harvested because they can't survive, they in a sense cook on the beach at low tide. They've existed for thousands of years and now are dying by the millions on our beaches. That's climate change. When we have a normal snowpack in April, but then we have a drought across the state, as we do now 3 months later, that's climate change. And it's touching our personal lives. Just one little anecdote, too. I called a good friend of mine to talk about some of the efforts we're making on climate change, but he said this morning, but he said he couldn't talk because he had to get ready to evacuate his house in Mazama because of approaching fires. Our legislative director's sister this morning is on, I believe, a stage 2 alert for potential evacuation in the Wenatchee fire. Heat and drought have forced curtailment of water and water use in many places across the state. We are under a state of emergency because of the wildfire risk, and we have a ban on most outdoor burning and agricultural burning. This is climate change. We sense it in the odors that we smell from the rotting shellfish. We sense it from the water temperatures where in the lower Snake, the Okanagan and Yakima rivers have reached levels that are lethal to fish, including threatened salmon species. On land, livestock are being lost. Spring wheat growers have reported as much as a 50% reduction in yield, and in some places, raspberry farmers have lost perhaps half of their crop. We live in a very diverse state ecologically. Coasts, rivers, mountains, high deserts. And they support one of the most robust economies in the United States. But every part of this state today is being threatened by climate change. This isn't just about high heat. It's about ravaging the basic systems that sustain us and our economy across the state of Washington. So these systems are not just sources of pride because they're beautiful. They sustain our lives and our economies. Now, we've been warned about this for years by the scientific community. The alarm bell only rings louder, and we cannot push snooze anymore. We've got to attack this threat at its source. Last year was our second worst wildlife season on record, and number one worst on record was just 6 years ago. We're having to put more public dollars into fighting these fires and to helping businesses and homeowners who've lost their homes and businesses because of these wildfires. Now, the worst thing about this is the direct loss of life of Washingtonians. It's not just devastated our economy or our natural ecosystems. It's devastated our families. We know already that 91 people lost their lives in the most recent heat dome event. Labor Industries, in response, has just passed an emergency rule recognizing the physical risk that people who work outside have to endure. This is an update on our existing standards, but it recognizes that extreme heat, like we've seen, presents additional risks. So now when conditions hit 100 degrees, Workers have to be provided shade to cool off. Above 89, cool drinking water must be readily available, and workers have to be allowed to take breaks to cool down. But we have to recognize a reality. When temperatures are this hot, people are going to lose their lives. Even if we have cooling centers, even if we have air conditioners, there are not enough air conditioners in the world to save us from climate change. So this was an emergency rule. It was said to be a once in 1,000-year event, but it could be a 1 in 5-year event in the years to come if we don't attack climate change. Now, this is not political hyperbole. It is a scientific consensus that is jarring the life of every Washingtonian in some way. I think we should refuse to accept that. We should recognize what my friend Bill Nye, the science guy, said the other day that I thought was pretty profound. He said, we are all in this together, and we are never more all in something together than in climate change. We need to be united in attacking and going right at the core problem here. And the core problem is carbon pollution. Our misery that we are suffering, our economic losses, loss of life, the loss of our glaciers, is because of a common foe. And our common foe is climate change. And we must attack that foe. We cannot be just defensive. You know, we couldn't win World War II just by building air raid shelters. We have to attack the reason that all of this is happening to us, which is carbon pollution. And thankfully, we know how to do that. Because frankly, we know this about climate change. You can run, but you can't hide. And that's what we have to face. And I hope that we will do so. Now, today, as partial response to this problem, I'm declaring a drought emergency for nearly the entire state. Laura Watson, our Department of Ecology Director, will talk about this in a moment later. The only areas that are excluded from this drought declaration are Everett, Seattle, and Tacoma metro areas because they are projecting adequate water supplies. The map you see on the screen from the Department of Ecology gives you a clear image of just how pronounced and all-encompassing this drought emergency is. Our spring and summer were historically dry before this record heat wave passed through. Unfortunately, the forecast through September indicates higher temperatures and below normal precipitation. So we're joined for speakers to address some of these issues. We're going to start with Department of Ecology Director Laura Watson. Laura.
Thank you, Governor. As the Governor noted, extreme heat and near record dryness have created hardship for many Washingtonians in terms of water supply and accessibility to water. As a result, today, we are declaring a drought emergency for most of the state. When we declare a drought emergency, that allows us to alleviate the hardships on residents through various tools, including expediting processing for emergency drought permits, temporary transfers of water rights, and providing funding assistance to public entities. As the Governor noted, Seattle, Tacoma, and Everett are expected to have sufficient water supplies, so those are the only areas of our state that are not subject to the emergency drought declaration. This year's drought did come as a surprise to many of us. We had robust winter snowpack in the Cascade Mountains, about 132% of usual. That led us to believe that water supplies would be adequate, would be healthy this year. Unfortunately, we've had the driest spring, second driest spring on record since 1895, followed by a record-breaking heat wave in late June. The heat wave brought triple-digit temperatures and smashed records across the state, as you all know. Temperatures hit nearly 120 degrees in eastern Washington. This extreme heat melted the snowpack very rapidly and worsened drought conditions. This is a grim reminder that water supplies do face an increasingly uncertain future because of climate change. Farmers and ranchers without irrigation in eastern Washington were among the first to experience the effects of this drought. And in south central Washington, farmers are experiencing the worst wheat and pasture conditions in 20 years. In addition, the Departments of Fish and Wildlife, Agriculture, and Natural Resources are getting reports of stressed fish kills. Farmers' crops are failing, ranchers are losing livestock, and wildfires are burning through dry vegetation. We are actively seeking ways to alleviate these hardships. We will be working with the governor's office and local communities to assess needs and to determine what resources we have available to us. This includes the governor's direction to us to work with the Office of Financial Management to identify funds for emergency assistance.
I'm going to call Hillary Franz, our Commissioner of State, Department of Natural Resources, to talk to us about the fire risk. Before I do, though, I want to thank her for her leadership. I think it's safe to say if you talk to people in the fire community, we have had a significant improvement in our ability to coordinate agencies and resources in fighting fires. I had a discussion late last week with several of our fire commanders. They were very pleased with the coordination they have with the state right now, and I want to thank her for her leadership of marshaling resources against fire. Hillary.
Thank you, Governor. Appreciate it. And it's great to see you, Director. This drought declaration reinforces everything that our hardworking scientists have been saying, frankly, for the last few months. Statewide, this historic stretch of drought has left vegetation bone dry with record low levels of moisture and what we call fuels statewide. And the record-breaking temperatures have only made things worse. I said earlier this year that these conditions could create a particularly bad fire season. Frankly, as I face my 5th fire season, I think this is likely to be the worst of the last 5 years. And we know what it's likely to look like. Our firefighters are already putting in long hours. I was talking to a number of firefighters who've already been putting in 18 hours days down in the Asotin area. They're doing it week after week. And we've already seen 3 firefighters injured. One of them, my own, was severely harmed during this fire season. We're seeing hundreds of evacuations, and just yesterday, we learned that the Chewewa Creek fire on the Colville Reservation has destroyed a number of homes. Statewide, there have been over 900 fires, with an estimated 140,000 acres burned. This is just shy of the total amount of acres that burned in all of 2019. And we are just in the beginning of July. It's not even August yet. When I talk to firefighters, fire chief, foresters, people who know this state, they know the landscape, they know our fire seasons, they have said what they're experiencing right now is what we usually see in the month of August. We've instituted a statewide burn ban, and we will continue to look at how we can best protect our communities as the months go on. I'm joining firefighters from across the state to urge every single resident of the state of Washington to please follow those burn bans. Please practice fire safety, and please help keep everyone, your family, your communities, and our firefighters safe this summer. Fortunately, a few months ago, the legislature passed a historic bill to provide the comprehensive, transformative investment we need in wildfire resources, forest health, and community resilience. We have begun the long-term work needed to change the trajectory of this wildfire crisis we keep experiencing year after year. But in order to truly be successful, we also need to change the trajectory of our climate crisis. If our new normal brings months without a drop of rain and one extreme heat wave after another, there's no technology or amount of resources that will be able to match the on-the-ground reality our firefighters are facing. What we have experienced these last few weeks is just a preview of what life will become without climate action on a state, national, and global level. Even the most robust and well-resourced fire departments in the country haven't been able to keep up with the historic drought confronting the Western United States. And our firefighters can't keep this up week after week, month after month, year after year. The good news is that we know what the solutions are. Losing homes and losing lives to a growing wildfire crisis is not inevitable. Together, each and every one of us can take and must act boldly to protect our land, our waters, our communities, and our firefighters who are putting their lives on the line every single day for us.
Thank you, Hillary, and please thank your firefighters for us. Well, one of the things, too, I was just talking to Hillary about is that we have to understand this is not your father's or mother's forest fires anymore. These are entirely different fire systems that are creating their own weather patterns, which create their own lightning storms that cause more ignition. This is a new phenomenon in some sense, and we have to act anew. With that, we have Derek Sanderson, Director of State Department of Agriculture, who's doing great work against murder hornets. He's already got some problems in Indian climate change. Derek.
Thank you, Governor. Well, I'm very proud of our agricultural industry in this state. We have some unique attributes. That, for instance, we grow over 300 crops and commodities, and we do that. There's commercial agriculture in every county of the state of Washington. But 2021 has been a challenging year for many sectors of Washington's agricultural industry. We started watching the drought conditions develop in eastern Washington. We knew that the wheat crop was and other dryland crops were under stress from poor soil moisture, lack of precipitation, and as we anticipated, we're seeing great reductions in yield in our spring wheat. In particular, but other spring crops as well. The wheat harvest is underway, so we're just starting to be able to assess the total impacts. But we expect that that maybe 50% yield reduction in spring wheat to continue. But layering on top of the drought impacts you're watching, the sudden heat dome, the heat wave impacts, that really affected virtually all parts of Washington, all geographic areas in Washington, and really cut a broad swath through our ag industry. Some of these impacts have been mentioned already, but we saw some significant losses in berry crops. And I should point out, I mean, we're accustomed in eastern Washington to see triple-digit temperatures, but we're not accustomed to seeing triple-digit temperatures in western Washington. And so when I talk about berry crops, raspberries in particular, a lot of those impacts occurred in counties like Whatcom and Skagit. We saw, of course, the shellfish impacts that the governor mentioned, combination of very low tides and high heat, essentially cooked shellfish, clams, oysters, and other products in the shellfish beds. We've seen impacts of maybe 90% losses in some commercial shellfish beds. We think there will be some yield reductions in cherries and possibly other tree fruit. Again, early in the season from the standpoint of tree fruit in particular, so we're still not in a position of being able to tally up all the impacts. We did note that dairy production fell during the heat wave by a significant amount, and the livestock losses that we saw just in a few days during that heat dome event. It's compounded by the loss of grazing lands. The grazing lands are drying up. We're also seeing great reductions in cattle feed, alfalfa, hay, etc. So we know that we're in this for the long haul. We've compounded everything with again the difficulties in terms of the labor impacts associated with the high heat and the need to protect workers. So we're working closely with U.S. Department of Agriculture, particularly the Farm Service Agency, to determine what resources may be available for mitigation of our ag losses, but that's going to be something that will continue to roll out through the rest of this year as we collect data on actual impacts. Thank you.
We have by a virtual presentation state climatologist Nick Bond to talk about the current conditions and the science behind all this. Nick.
Thank you very much. And just checking that my audio and video feed is fine.
You're good.
And Yeah, great. And so, as climatologist for the state of Washington, 2021 to date has been very interesting, let's say. And while Governor Inslee and Director Watson have stolen some of my punchlines, I'll get over it. I'll be able to provide some specifics here. And in particular, after all that snow that we had in the mountains in late winter, just how dry it was this spring. We got statewide only about 6 inches of rain, where normally it's 11 inches. That's a big difference. And moreover, the deficits percentage of normal were especially striking in the lower elevations of eastern Washington that was already kind of dried out anyway. Of course, the heat wave occurred and all that, all the unprecedented magnitude, all the records and that sort of thing. But while temperatures have moderated in the Puget Sound lowlands, in much of the rest of the state, it has remained considerably warmer than normal. And so that is, in many ways, that heat wave was just an event, and it's these kind of long-term changes that are really, problematic. And here, I think I'd like to, for the present conversation, take the opportunity to, a longer-term perspective on the observed climate in Washington State. Simply put, in summer, it is warmer and drier. Comparing recent years to 3 or 4 decades ago, there's something like 2/3 the amount of precipitation there was before, and temperatures have risen by about 2 degrees, even more so at night and more systematically. And so the important point there is climate change is not an abstract future concept. It is here and now. And so we've got our immediate problems with the present drought, and I should add, and I believe it was mentioned before, that the crystal ball indicates the rest of summer is liable to be on the warm and dry side, especially east of the Cascades. But what we're seeing in the long term, continued warming all seasons of the year and drying in the summer is something that's expected, and I say we got to do something about it. So thanks for the opportunity to speak, and I'll be here to answer any questions that are posed. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. Some would say it's not warm, it's hot when the forest fires are burning, but that's just a verbiage. We have Laura Jenks, our Assistant Secretary for Environmental Health at Department of Health, to talk about some of the health impacts of climate change.
Thank you, Governor. Yes, and I know we all across the state have seen from COVID-19 that global health issues come home here to Washington, and we've seen what that's like when a global health issue comes home, right? We've seen the loss of life, we've been separated from our loved ones, and it has disrupted our lives. This drought, these wildfires, this recent heat dome, these are all clear signals that global climate change is a global health problem coming home here, and it is causing loss of life, and it's disrupting our lives, and it's threatening our health right now and on into the future, as Nick has just pointed out. Over the last 30 years, heat-related deaths have been the #1 cause of weather-related deaths throughout the country. And in our most recent heat wave, we have seen 91 people at least who have lost their lives due to heat, and we'll see this increase. What we need to remember now, right, in the areas of the state that are still hotter than usual, is that we are not acclimated to this, right? This is not something where in a normal summer you might become acclimated to the heat. This is unprecedented heat, and so we cannot tough it out. We need to pay attention to our bodies, and when we are feeling weaker or thirsty or hot, we need to take that very seriously. It's important for all of us to find a plan for how we're going to stay cool in this hotter weather, and especially in the west side, that can mean some creative thinking around finding places that are air conditioned that we can stay. So if the wildfires are impacting you because you can see the fire or you're needing to evacuate, that is its own health and mental health issue that is severe. And even those of us who are not right next to the fire, our health can also be impacted by the smoke from that fire. Many people can be particularly sensitive to smoke. People who have asthma, if they are exposed to that wildfire smoke, they can have more severe or more frequent asthma attacks, right? And those can sometimes be deadly. Women who are pregnant, if they are exposed to the smoke and are sensitive, can go into preterm labor. Smoke can impact our health in many different ways. And what I would say to you is if you are smelling the smoke, or you can tell from our apps or the smoke blog that the air quality is poor in your area, and you're starting to feel any symptoms at all, like itchy, watery eyes, or your throat's itchy, those are minor impacts from the smoke, yes, but what they are telling you is that your body is reacting to the smoke, and it's time to come inside and find a cleaner, find cleaner air. Right now, wherever you are in the state, whether you are impacted by smoke right now or not, it's time to make your plan for your house and find those filters that you may put into your HVAC system or your heating and air conditioning system in your house, or prepare portable air filters or those do-it-yourself models with the fan and an air filter duct taped to it that can help clean a room for you if the air quality gets bad. And above all of that, we all need to be taking steps to reduce our carbon footprint so that we can mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. So that's finding ways to drive your car less, whether that's biking, walking, using Zoom to talk with people, or whatever that may, public transportation, whatever that means for you, is to drive less and to make choices in your purchases that are energy efficient, whether that's a small purchase like a hair dryer or a large house purchase like a heat pump. It's important for us all to be thinking about the most energy efficient ways that we can live our lives so that we can have a good impact on the global climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for your team's efforts. Thanks for the speakers to talk about this issue. You know, maybe if we stop to think about it, this would be obvious what we're experiencing this summer. But I do believe this summer is a summer for all Washingtonians to ask ourselves this question. What is Washington without healthy forests, oysters, salmon? What is Washington without glaciers and alpine meadows? What is Washington without the ability of our children to go out in a smoke-free atmosphere in August? This is a moment, a crux moment for the state of Washington. And I'm hopeful that while we're suffering through this tough summer, we are equally dedicated to fighting climate change. That is our destiny. We're in this together. We need to be united on this together so that we can defeat this common foe. Now, we have another common foe. I want to comment on COVID. We've had some progress. We've reached 70% of the eligible adults over 16. This is great news. We have done well relative to other states. The last I looked, we were 8th or 9th as far as our vaccination rates. This is tremendous because we know if you're vaccinated, you're pretty much safe. And if you're not vaccinated, you're pretty much a target. And COVID will find you. And the Delta variant is out there, and it's growing rapidly. And we see what it's done to other states. So we've had some good success in our vaccination effort. But we all ought to be concerned about this. We have vaccination deserts in our state. The vaccination rates range from some counties to 81% down to 31% in other counties. It would be such a terrible result if we snatch defeat from the jaws of victory here of having a relatively high vaccination rate, one of the lowest statewide infection rates in the United States. We are bringing back our economy. Our restaurants are opening again. We're going back to ball games, and then have certain counties end up causing these pockets of infection. It's not something that we ought to look forward to, and I hope all of us will help each other get vaccinated, take care of ourselves, take care of our loved ones. Our efforts will continue in this regard. We have Lacey Fehrenbach and Nick Struley here today. If there's any particular questions, you may fire when ready. Gridley.
Governor, wheat growers and the Grain Commission last month asked for this drought declaration. Why didn't you grant it then, considering that farmers were already expressing concerns about crop stress and reduced yields?
Well, we thought that they would not have been able to get assistance earlier in any event, so we had to wait till the scientific information had matured to allow this to happen. But I don't believe it's delayed anything that we could use as far as permits for wells or anything. But now it is necessary where those things can be of usefulness. That's why we've issued this declaration. Or do you want to address this issue at all?
I think the governor pretty well covered it. You know, as I explained, the drought conditions sort of evolved, whereas when the legislature was in session, we thought that we were going to have good water conditions. And then in May, when we issued our drought advisory, we hadn't met the statutory criteria, the legal criteria yet for issuing a drought emergency. And then as conditions continued to worsen and water supply continued to dwindle, we realized we had hit those legal requirements to declare a drought emergency. I do understand that the U.S. Department of Agriculture did declare its own drought disaster for large portions of the state, opening up funding to make that funding available to wheat growers and other farmers who have been impacted.
Are there any plans to ask people to voluntarily cut their water use or to direct state agencies to curtail their use, as has been done in California and Oregon? And then also for Commissioner Franz, are there any concerns about fuel shortages for firefighting aircraft as we've seen in other states?
So that asking for voluntary curtailment by residential users, that is not on the table right now. What the drought emergency declaration allows us to do, as I said, is to open up the tools, to provide tools for emergency drought permits, to provide funding to local communities who may need that funding. A lot of local communities, though, will advise their residents to voluntarily curtail their water use. So, for example, letting your lawn go, letting your lawn go brown for a season. A lot of local communities will advise residents, as long as it doesn't present its own fire risk, to allow lawns to go dormant and then just let those lawns get green again once the rains come.
She had another question that I think she asked.
Did you get all the other questions answered, though? Before?
So getting back to the fuel concern.
Yeah, I mean, we're watching. We obviously have concerns. I'll say the highest concern we have when it comes to our air resources, first and foremost, having enough, right? This year, we have actually more than almost doubled the amount of air resources based on every single year. We keep coming up short because we lose in the battle to California, Oregon, and other states that are on fire before us. And they have oftentimes way more values at risk because their fires are so much more significant. So this year, we increased those number of air resources. But given the majority of Western states are in drought-like conditions with huge wildfire risk, that's our number one concern right now, is making sure we still have enough air resources given how early our fire season is started and how long it will last. I think second is we face enormous concerns right now. We're expecting increased winds again in the next couple of days. There are often times where we can't fly because of those increased winds. We also can't always fly when we have a significant amount of smoke and it's not safe for our pilots to go up. And then we are watching that concern around fuel shortage. We're not yet at that place of graveness, but it's one of those items.
If I may add something, John, if you just let me add something here. You know, when you deal with these kind of emergencies, and obviously I've dealt with many of them as governor now for several years, the tendency is to think, well, you know, what can government do in the short term to respond to this problem? And I understand that, but we've got to understand this fundamentally. There's not an early enough drought emergency to solve this problem of not enough water. There's not enough planes in the United States Air Force to solve the problem of forest fires. There's not enough air conditioners to make it safe for our kids to go outside. Government cannot save you unless it defeats climate change. And government and all of us need to work together to defeat climate change. That is our only salvation. And we're doing Band-Aids when we're being assaulted on every part and every county of our state. We have got to go to the central core of this. And that's the message that we have today.
Let's go to Joe next.
Director Watson, can you talk about the financial tools that you would give to communities, what that might go toward and how much you have to available to deploy?
Yes, so we're able to give emergency grant funds to communities. It has to go to public entities, but that would include irrigation districts. Unfortunately, we have a smaller pot of money available than we would if we knew we would be in drought conditions while the legislature was in session. We would have asked for additional funds while the legislature was in session, and as a result, we have about $300,000 so far that we have identified, but we are working at the governor's direction with the Office of Financial Management to identify additional funds that could be used for these purposes, and working with local communities to assess the needs of those communities.
Do you have a sense of what $300,000 buys you?
To give a comparison, in 2019, for the 2019 drought, we spent a little over $600,000. So that can provide, we can provide water for fish with that. We can give grants to sort of build alternative means to divert water, to draw water from a source that isn't depleted or hasn't dwindled to that extent. So there's a variety of things, and the price tags associated with each option would vary.
Go ahead. Someone else would have a question that could answer this, but I wondered if you could talk or explain maybe the geologic differences that are allowing one of the most populous regions not to be affected. How Spada Lake in the Everett area and the Snohomish County area is excluded. What is happening there? What do they have that the rest of the state does not have at this time?
It's basically that they have municipal water supplies and they have storage of those municipal water supplies, and so their conditions.
I guess how do they have the different glaciers or different runoff? The snowpack melted in a different way. How would they end up with so much more water in an area that's so urban?
They have water storage. And so water storage, as the governor was talking about, we need to defeat climate change to be able to really defeat and really tackle these issues. Another thing we need to do is to prepare for drought resilience. And so one of the key tools for preparing for drought resilience is to build water storage so that when we're in drought years, there's a water capacity that can be tapped.
Sort of follow up on everyone's questions here. $300,000 and $600,000 really doesn't seem like it's all that much. How much do you anticipate you will ultimately need this year? Do you have specific sources identified? And how much of this you think you get from the feds?
So there's a few different questions wrapped up in there. Let me try to make sure that I'm answering all of them. I do think $300,000 is probably not going to be enough to help us get through all of the needs. We haven't done a full needs assessment yet, but we are reaching out to local communities to understand what their needs might be, and we'll be looking for other sources of funds that we may be able to tap in the interim to cover for drought emergency, perhaps going to the legislature next session and asking them to reimburse those funds. We're also working with the drought committee of the legislature to help us identify those funds. The federal government does provide assistance, and Director Sandison may be more equipped to speak to this. They do provide assistance to agricultural interests through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They can provide emergency loans. They can open up additional pasture land to livestock, for example. They can provide emergency hay. So there is additional assistance that the federal government provides, but it's largely limited to agricultural interests.
Do you have a guesstimate on you're going to need like $5 million, and how fast you're going to need this money? Because summer's half over. Won't you be needing this in the next few weeks as opposed to waiting half a year?
I think we'll be able to identify additional funds on a relatively short time frame. We have been, I've got a team of folks that have been working hard in trying to identify those additional funds. I don't think it's going to be as high as $5 million because we are so far. Yeah, we're so far into the season. Like I said, it was, last Last time we had a drought in 2019, it was a little over 600,000.
Let me add something if I can to John's question. We're looking for additional resources, John, financially to accommodate this. So we're scrubbing some cash drawers to find this. So we hope to have additional resources. But I want to make this point that listening to this discussion, there's been a lot of questions about the financial aspect of climate change. I just want to say this. Money cannot replace the state of Washington. Money cannot replace the experience of catching a salmon with a 10-year-old kid. Money can't replace the joy of getting oysters. Money can't replace a kid being able to go out and play outside on a hot August day that they couldn't because of the smoke. Money can't replace the state of Washington. Could you put that picture of that glacier back up, Josie? I just want to show you a picture of a glacier. I hiked up the railroad grade trail the other day on the slopes of Mount Baker with my son and daughter-in-law, and it was really nice to have a son and daughter-in-law who's willing to go hiking with an old guy, and it was really nice. They were willing to do this. So we hiked up on the south slopes of Mount Baker, and it's right on the moraine of the Easton Glacier. And there's a picture of it, I believe, here. It's a picture of the toe of the Easton Glacier, and it feeds down into a moraine. You can't see it that well, but that Easton Glacier used to be farther. That moraine used to went hundreds of yards further down. We're losing our ice. Imagine Washington without glaciers on Rainier or Baker or Glacier, or at least significantly reduced. That's what's happening. Rainier's lost, I think, something like 35% of its ice mass in this century. And it was just a magic moment to be up there in these incredible alpine meadows with these beautiful lupin flowers, and it was a sunny day, and to think that my great-grandkids may not be able to experience that, I will not accept that. And I'm here to say that I hope people will join us all together in fighting climate change so our grandkids can enjoy this beautiful state that cannot be replaced with money. That's what we're here today to talk about. And I believe that we will succeed on that, but by gum, it's time to get going.
Who's the spokesman on the phone?
I have a question.
Austin, do you want to go, and then we'll go with both?
Sure. Regarding the COVID variant and the fact that most kids still aren't vaccinated, and now we're hearing reports of kids in ICUs, even on ventilators, I'm just wondering about your level of concern, what you're hearing from your health experts, and what are you watching for that might prompt some action or need to change the course you're on?
Well, yes, we are very concerned. We're concerned because particularly in the areas that are vaccination deserts. As I indicate, we have several counties that are in the 30-35% level of vaccination. That means that 2/3 of their citizens are bioreactor mutation labs because this virus mutates in our bodies if the virus can proliferate, and that's what's going on in these counties. So particularly in those counties, everyone is at risk, including now children, that it appears that there's some more serious results being occasioned in our young people. So yes, there is a reason to be very concerned. That's why we are continuing our efforts to improve vaccination rates. We've been working with the medical community very vigorously so that the medical community can share medical information with their patients. One of the things that we've encouraged citizens is that if you have questions about the vaccine, call your physician, call your nurse, call a medical scientist who really understand it. Get the straight scoop from the medical practitioners. If more people will do that, vaccinations will increase. Well, right now, when you've got a target on the back of 2/3 of the people in some of these counties, it is a dangerous moment, and that is the situation. So the answer to your question, yes, we are concerned.
So just briefly, I know you're about to give away $1 million to somebody who gets their vaccine, but are there other incentive programs that you could do to try to get the number above 70 and to reach those resistant people?
Not at the moment. We are not considering additional financial incentive, but what we are very assiduously looking for is ways to get medical information in the hands of people, ways to get their trusted messengers to talk to them, their pastors, their preachers, their rabbis, their neighbors, their employers. Now, employers are going to have an obligation to keep their employees in a safe, hygienic working environment this year. people who are not vaccinated are going to continue to be required to wear masks inside. I want to repeat that. People who are not vaccinated will be required to wear a mask when they're indoors at their place of employment. Employers will be required by law to assure that that happens. So there's going to be multiple incentives, including the ability to be unmasked at work.
Follow up on that, maybe it's a question for Lacey, but early in the pandemic and early in the vaccine came out, we heard numbers as high as 30% of healthcare workers not taking and accepting the vaccine. I wondered, what is the percent now, and in those counties with the low vaccination rates, what is the percent? And what are the reasons healthcare workers might be resistant?
Lacey, do you have any recent info on that?
Yes, thanks for the question. And it's a little hard to hear the reporters in the room, so I want to repeat it to make sure I understand. You're asking percent of healthcare workers vaccinated today? Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the question.
Thanks. So we unfortunately do not get data into our data system by profession. We were able to give those estimates early on because it was primarily healthcare workers that were eligible. So we will certainly have to look into this further. I will say we are concerned about people vaccinating. I think the governor is right on. If you are not vaccinated, you are at significant risk for COVID-19. The virus is still here, and if you're in one of those communities with low vaccination rate, your community is at significant risk for outbreaks, ongoing and in the near future.
Yeah, I want to follow up on what Lacey said. I think it's a really important point. You know, I've talked to folks say, well, this is an individual right. If I want to run the risk of dying on an intubator after being sick for a month. I went to a funeral the other day of a state employee who was in hospital for a month in his early 40s. If you want to run that risk, and people are saying, hey, that's my decision, I can run the risk. The problem with that is you're making a risk for everybody around you when you don't get vaccinated. You're a risk for your spouse, you're a risk for your kids, your grandkids, your parents, your co-workers, because you are a bioreactor facility generating virus and spreading it around, including to kids who can't get vaccinated. I want to reiterate that. If you're a 50-year-old man who, voted for Donald Trump and didn't think COVID was a problem and you don't get vaccinated right now, you arrest every kid in your city because you could be spreading a virus to a 10-year-old who can't get eligible for the vaccine right now. Now, some of us think that's not responsible. And if that's judgmental, so be it. I think we ought to save people's lives that we love in our community. And I hope that we'll start doing that more.
Who are the spokesmen, and we'll do the TV in the room and anybody else from the court. Okay, so take Nico Portando from the spokesman. Go ahead, Nico.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I wanted to ask a quick question about heat. Statewide, at least 91 people have died due to the heat wave a few weeks ago. So what is the state doing to compel or support local regions to better prepare for a future heat wave that may be more likely because of climate change now?
Well, I'm going to answer just a little different question than you asked maybe. What we're doing is the single most important thing to do, which is to rally our state against the cause of these more frequent heat waves, and that's climate change. That's the most important thing we can do. That's the thing that's going to work ultimately. It's the thing that the moment calls for, and that's the most vital thing that we're doing right now, which is fighting climate change at its source, which is carbon pollution. That's number one. Number two, we will continue our efforts to have cooling centers. We had hundreds or thousands of cooling centers. Some of these folks, for one reason or another, could not get to a cooling center. Many of them did not recognize that they were in a potentially dangerous situation. We obviously want to have as much education as we can about how people can recognize the symptoms of being in problems. But when you have this kind of heat, you're going to have people in this fatal situation because some folks may not recognize the problem. Some folks may not be cognizant of their surroundings. That's why we have to stop this heat at its source, and that's what we're doing.
Some of the TV in the room. You guys, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin Carlos,
all-in effort to defeat climate change. And they can make a decision in their life that they're going to make voting decisions based on this, that they can make purchasing decisions based on this, that they can make educational decisions based on this. That's something we can do today. Now, after that, there's 1,000 things we can do. We can save a little bit of water. We can try to talk to our friends if we have an elderly neighbor who may not have air conditioning, to see if you can help them out in a difficult situation. That's something we certainly can do. So we can do 1,000 acts of kindness. But again, I want to reiterate today, if we don't attack this problem, we're not going to solve it. Yeah.
I just have to.
Yeah, thank you.
Besides the context of addressing the larger challenge of climate change, thank you, Governor, for your leadership on that, and obviously water resources. I have to speak for our firefighters, frankly. Thousands of men and women, many of them the age of my oldest son, now my second son, because they're growing up so fast. We too often think when wildfire season is here that there's nothing we can do, we're helpless. And the reality is there's several things we can do, and they are significant. 90% of our fires are still to date caused by humans. Human activity is causing a majority of these fires, so we can be one less spark. That's why myself and the governor have issued burn bans for the entire state, and we are urging people to please take all necessary precautions not to light or cause any spark anywhere out on the landscape. It is too hot, dry, and too fuel likely intense. Second is the context of getting our homes ready, right? We have over 2 million homes at risk in Washington state, and that is growing as we've seen now the projection around drought and how much of our state is in drought and how dry that landscape has gotten. We have now larger area of Washington state that is in high risk for wildfires, both sides of the Cascades, and people need to start creating that defensible space around their home, and it is not too late. I think every one of the homeowners that is now currently evacuated, and there is quite a number for this early in the season, would say they're grateful they did X, or gosh, they wish they had done. That means creating. We learned the 6-foot defensible space around our bodies. It didn't take us long. We all got it down pretty quickly. We now need to apply the same rule to our homes. That's 6 foot plus of defensible space around our homes. Don't think if you're in Pierce County or Snohomish County or Kitsap County that you are safe. Don't think if you're in Clark County, Cowlitz County, or even Pacific, Grays Harbor, and Wahkiakum County that you are safe, that this is just an Eastern Washington issue. It is an entire Washington state issue. And if people can take steps now, it will protect their homes and their families and their communities, and also our firefighters that are doing everything to save our state and the people.
Commissioner France, if I could just ask one question. You were in Okanagan last year. You were in Malden last year. A town that literally burned to the ground after these fires. But you're predicting this fire season to be the worst one you've ever seen. Can I ask why?
Yes. So we are already, first of all, the numbers that we have seen to date have just even in June and in May were double the number of fires we saw in 2020. They were, in many cases, 50% more than what we saw in 2020. They were double what we've seen in the 10-year average. And we were just in May and June, and we aren't seeing moisture on the horizon. We aren't seeing, that's what this whole press conference is about. We're not seeing that let up. Last year, we actually had a cooling temperature come in July. We had overcast skies. We didn't have 100+ degrees throughout much of our state. And that gave us some cautious optimism. And then what happened? Labor Day firestorms blew the entire number equation up. We are now projecting that every single week we are going to see increasing catastrophic wildfires on our landscape. We have currently right now 5 significant ones that have just broken out over the last 7 days. And we are concerned that that is only going to keep playing out in August and September until we start to get some more moisture, right? When you add in also that the Western United States is in significant drought-like conditions, that means every one of those states is fighting as hard as we are to help reduce the wildfires that they're seeing. We're all going to be competing for very few resources to fight these fires. And we're not going to get any sense of it letting up or any sort of break in that based on what we heard from our climate We're at a state of urgency and frankly, a state of emergency.
Let me, look, we understand there's a lot of bad news here today, right? Not a happy moment considering the damage we have. But we also have to realize we're not helpless against this foe. We're not helpless because we know how to defeat climate change, and that's to build a clean energy economy, and we're doing that. Last Thursday or Friday, I was in Ferndale at the opening or groundbreaking of the Vicinity Motor Corporation. They're going to make electric buses right here with great workers, electric buses, so we don't put out carbon pollution. This is the kind of thing that can defeat climate change and will. But it will only happen if we recognize that we have to fight it when it is coming at us at its source. Not just aerial tankers, not just air conditioners, but in fact, building a clean energy economy. And if we turn to that, we're going to succeed. And if we don't, we won't.
Q13 or King? Do we have King online? Okay, go ahead.
Back to WebEx, we'll go up next to Michael Crow, King 5. Go ahead, Michael.
Hey there, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Governor, you talked about going to the source of this. Of course, I know you were able to pass a couple of climate initiatives this year at state level, but we're one state among a country and a world of countries. How satisfied are you with the discussion on climate initiatives at the federal level, especially in this pending infrastructure bill? Is enough being done there?
Well, I'm very encouraged in general by President Biden's leadership. He has been bold and aggressive, and I think that's tremendous. There are two bills, both of which are necessary to cut the mustard here. One is an infrastructure bill, and the second is a reconciliation bill. We need much, much more than the infrastructure bill. But from what I heard, and I just got sort of the top line the other day, there's big things planned in the reconciliation bill for climate change, and that's a good thing, including a clean energy standard. So that's good. Is it enough? I haven't seen the details, but I do know it is a very robust, substantial leadership effort by President Biden, and the Democrats in the legislature are really pushing, and that's what we need. That's what we need if we're going to solve this problem, and that's the central message of this press conference. That's the kind of action we need. But it's not just the federal government, because we can do things here, as I indicated, build electric buses in Ferndale. That's just one of the things we can do. So we got to keep that up as well.
We have time for two more. Up next, we'll go to WebEx with Casey Decker from Crown. Go ahead, Casey.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So if there's something we learned from the pandemic, one thing is that you have pretty broad emergency powers as governor, the ability to shut down businesses and the like. So have you explored any options you may have to take unilateral action on climate change, maybe, even stricter caps on emissions from certain industries or corporations, that sort of thing?
Well, we're always considering options. There are potential actions by the executive branch. I'm not prepared to talk about them right now, so I won't go into them. But I do know that all of us have to be digging deep to see whatever tools we can use, and we'll continue to do that.
All right. Last question will go to Liz Birch with Clients. Go ahead, Liz.
Hi, Governor. Thanks for taking my question. I'm wondering what your message is for the people who are in the paths of wildfires and what you've learned on your years of governor that you want to change on the state's approach to attacking wildfires.
Well, the first message is be safe. Property can be replaced, our lives cannot. Be safe with your family. Follow the advice and requirements and instruction of the emergency crews. That's extremely important. The pace and acceleration of these fires is something that's unprecedented. If you get the word to go, go. It's the only safe decision. I've talked to people that did not follow that. I went to the Paradise Fire in California a couple years ago and saw how fast people can become trapped. So that's number one. Number two, following the commissioner's advice, try to firewise your property, right? Get your branches away from your eaves, get the dry material away from your house, cut the brush. That can be very, very effective. And three, make a decision to help our state be united in its fight against climate change. This is something we got to be all together in, and if we do that, good things will happen. As far as a change to our firefighter firefighting strategy, as I've indicated, I think we've had a significant improvement in the last couple of years. I think Commissioner Franz's leadership has been important to that effort. We are attacking some of the smaller fires earlier than perhaps we've done in previous years, in part because we've got additional resources to do that. So I think we're making good strides in that. But again, humans cannot control these fires if the climate causes them. And that's the situation we're in. Do you want to add anything to that, Hillary? Is there anything you want to add?
I mean, I think one of the things, and I was talking to firefighters down in Asotin, I've been talking to firefighters up in Colville, and every single year, we are getting better at fighting these fires. It starts with initial attack. The moment we see smoke in the air, we are putting our air resources on those fires and getting them on quickly so we can make it safe for our hand crews to get in and contain it. Our biggest challenge continues to be amount of resources. On every one of these fires, people, as the season goes on, we're needing more air resources. We're needing more hand crews. We are having firefighters work 18, 24 hours. Last year during the labor firestorm, 96 hours straight, some of these people. And it's because why? We don't have enough resources to keep up with the number of catastrophic fires we're seeing on the landscape. I think a more important thing people should realize too is, and Governor, you mentioned Paradise, right? We all remember the tragic images of Paradise, California. And since that year, we've seen more play out in California, Oregon, Colorado, and right here in our home state of Washington. What happened in Malden was tragic. And within 2 to 3 hours, that entire town, over 80% of the buildings completely destroyed. The reality is Malden wasn't even in the top 25 worst, most highest wildfire risk communities in Washington state. That number is growing rapidly, and it is only getting worse. And people need to be very, very vigilant about the risks that are coming and what this season is holding and what's likely to be in the future years ahead of us. I do want to just call out to the governor's leadership, the legislature's leadership this year. They truly stepped up to this challenge that we are facing in wildfire resources and fighting those with critical amount of resources, but also being able to get at the root of the problem, which is we have a forest health crisis in Washington state. It is growing. It's moving over to the west side of the Cascades, and we have communities that are right now in high wildfire risk with very limited resources to make their communities more resilient. We are going to be mounting the resources to meet the challenge in front of us. What we need to do is reduce that challenge right now, today.
Great states pull together. And today we're saying this summer, this is a summer of climate change. We're tasting it, we're smelling it, we're feeling it, we're suffering from it. And it is a moment to realize we're all in this together. And if we realize we're all in this together, north and south, urban and rural, all of us are being attacked by climate change. I do believe if we pull together, we can build a clean energy economy and defeat this foe. And this is a summer that I think we should brace ourselves to that effort. Please be well.